we're so excited to have Rabbi Stewart Vogel here. He is the rabbi of Temple Aliyah in Woodland Hills, California, and he is the president of the Rabbinical Assembly. I know. I think so. I don't know. Yeah. So we are great. We're really happy to have you.
Nice to be here. Eric, I actually think we have the West San Fernando Valley, right? In the last hour.
I know. It's true. Like Thousand Oaks, Woodland Hills. It's crazy.
And Rabbi Averbach, you don't know this, actually grew up at Valley Shalom when I was rabbi there in those early days. So long history with him, and he's about 10 miles just west of me now. Actually about 20 miles, but it feels like, of course, we're neighbors. And that was such a great session. I don't want to follow him or you or a lot, not right. It's been amazing teaching, and just can't believe you're 23 hours later. Rabbi Garber, we're almost there. Almost there. It's been, by the way, it has been fabulous. I wanted to say, in terms of president of the Rabbinical Assembly, the work that went into this by Rabbi Garber, by everybody who was involved, by Max Arad and others, just like so spectacular that we can provide this for our community and the work of the Rabbinical Assembly. Oh my goodness. So just kudos to everybody involved and to everybody. So I'm going to everybody, I was just thinking, most of the people are in shul listening to the 10 Commandments, and I'm going to be talking about them because today is the day. Today is when we reenact the receiving of the Torah. By the way, we can talk about what is Torah, what 10 Commandments, what's the difference, why do we call it Zman Matan Toratenu? By the way, what did it look like, the tablets that Moses came down with? Now, okay, so we know they're made out of stone, but what was on each one? Right? Now, you're assuming, those of you who are watching, because you've just been trained, that like the first 5 are on the first tablet, the second 5 are on the second tablet, right? Rabbi Woodward, that's what most people get. It's how Christian art has portrayed it. But the truth of the matter is we have no clue what's on those tablets, because I just want you to think about it. You have any architects out there or mathematicians maybe, right? If you're going to think about how you're going to design tablets, and in terms of balancing them, in terms of what's written on them, would you take, the first 5 have 146 Hebrew words on, and the second 5 have 26? Is that how you would design it? I don't think we're going to create it that way. And so we're just not so sure about what they look like. By the way, how do you divide them? So you're also all used to, probably if you know any of this tradition, of saying that the first 5 of the commandments are ben adam lemakom, between people and God, and the second 5 are ben adam lechavero, between people and their fellow. The only problem is then we struggle, like the rabbis do, about shall honor your parents, right? Because what are you going to do with that one? Is it really between us and God? And so they come up with this great idea, this midrashic connection that says parents give birth to us, and just as we learn how to worship them, if you will, right, that we learn how to worship God, and that's the way. By the way, that's the rabbinic tradition trying to create clarity. And we don't have such clarity. By the way, there's a rabbi, Beno Yaakov, who comes around in the 1800s, early 1900s, actually till 1945. And he suggested, by the way, as many have others, that it comes in triplets. Like the first commandment, I'm the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, by the way, out of the house of bondage. So we're going to talk about that at the end as well. That's the introduction. And then you have 3 that talk about honoring God, right? Those are going to be the next 3. Okay, so that's right. You shall have no idols. You shall have no. You shall not take God's name in vain. And then Shabbat. Those all relate to God. And then you, by the way, have dealing with humans. So parents. And then we're going to talk about murder and adultery and all of those sexual crimes. And then the last 3 are about possessions. Right, so it makes sense in terms of you shouldn't steal, you can't lie in a court of law about possessions, and about coveting, and we're going to get to that in a moment. There's another one that suggests, by the way, that it's actually 3 plus 3 plus 1. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, right, actually suggested this as well, where the first 3 deal about obedience and loyalty to God. That makes sense. The next 3 deal with createdness of life. All right. And then the next, right, so 7, 8, and 9 then are about basic institutions of society which hold us together. And then the last one is the most curious, right, about coveting. Right. So what is this idea about coveting? Is it just wanting something? So we're going to look at this and we're going to talk about how it's trying to deal with our basic human, if you will, desire of wanting. And how do the rabbis look at that? So we're going to go to my source sheet. God willing, right? Please, we're going to go to our source sheet. There you go. I love when they're on task there. We have great people behind the scenes, Rabbi Woodard, who are making this happen as well. So the 10th commandment, right? You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male or female slave or his ox or his donkey. All right. I think it's GP here. So I'll just have to be careful, or anything that's your neighbor's. Now that's right from Exodus. Now, if you've probably heard tonight, right, at least a couple of times, there's two sets of commandments repeated in Deuteronomy by Moses, who is talking to the Israelites as they're about to go into the land. And here is the version that we have in Deuteronomy. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not crave or desire, right? And it's a different word, titaveh, in Hebrew, or his house or his field, or his male or female slave, or his ox or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. And right, that's from Deuteronomy, it's 5, and that fell off there, the number 18. So we're going to look at two sources right now. The first one, Mechilta de Rabbi Ishmael, a rabbinic source, says, you shall not covet. Right? Rabbi says, one verse states, you shall not covet, and the other in Deuteronomy says, you shall not desire. Lo titaveh versus lo tachmod. How are these two verses to be reconciled? As positing liability for desiring in itself and for coveting in itself. Is desire the same as coveting? What is coveting? Is coveting just wanting something a lot? Like, how do we understand it? As teaching that if one desires, in the end, one will covet. So somehow the rabbis see this as a gradation. If you begin by wanting something, you're going to end up really wanting it. You're going to think about what it means to be obsessed with it. Maybe that's how we can look at it, right? And then do not desire, and you will not covet. And if he does covet, in the end, he will use force and steal, as it is written in Micah 2:2. They will covet fields and then steal. So some have suggested, by the way, we'll talk a little bit more about this, that coveting comes at the end, because when you covet something, it's the root of all evil, because you're going to be willing to lie, right? To cheat, to steal, to engage in inappropriate relations, and even to murder. You're going to violate all social norms when you really want something. All right, we're going to look at Shadal, Luzzatto, the next commentary. Do not covet. Coveting is desire for something which now belongs to others and is consequently forbidden to us. That is, it is not for sale, right? See, he's trying to define, what do you mean you can't want things? What does that mean? You see, every desire and coveting comes from spontaneously into human hearts after seeing something desirable. But it's within one's capacity and will to stop that coveting as it emerges, and to distance from one's heart when one knows that attaining the desirable thing is impossible for one, or one may not keep it in his heart, and let its bonfire grow until one acts on it when one knows that acting on it is impossible. And God, having said, do not commit adultery, do not steal, forbidding the taking of what belongs to another. Now God says what belongs to other people must be in your eyes as if it were utterly unattainable by us. And having commanded us not to take what belongs to another, we are now commanded not to covet it. And everyone who covets is under this forbidding. Violence comes lightly to him and seems possible as anyone who reveres God's word sees violence as prevented. And what doesn't belong to him as if it were in the heavens, so they cannot seize it and does not covet it. All right. Tell you what, let's go off the share. So what are we talking about here? Right? It's this idea that you can want things in life. Right? You can look around the store and say, I'd love that. You can look at things in the world and you attain them. Because, by the way, I don't know about you, Rabbi Woodard, I'm working on a sermon that's about, we talk about, Ezehu Hashir, who's wealthy, Hasomech v'helko, the one who is content with his lot in life. But what does that mean? Does that mean you don't try for anything? Right? Does it mean you have no desires and no will to create something more? Right? We know that. So how do we live in that balance? And the rabbis are trying to help us. That's the point. Like, the rabbis are trying to help us understand it's human nature. We're going to get to that in a moment. So they're telling us, though, now they're trying to create the categories of what is okay to desire and what is not okay to desire. When you walk into somebody's house and you want to take what they have, right? And because it's theirs. And we do this from the time we're young. With life, we do this. We're envious of other people. And we don't just want the things that we have, we want their things. By the way, maybe even their spouse. Maybe even something else. Like, what is it? And we have to realize that that is when we get into coveting. And when you become obsessed. You've been obsessed with things before, right? This idea of what we want, and you can't think about it. And then the illness is, once you get one thing, you just want the next thing. I remember right when I started, when you get a car, your first car, you go, oh my God, I'm so thankful for this car. And then you go, but you know what? I'd really like that nicer car. I'm ready for a Lexus now, right? And then you're ready for a Tesla. And then you're ready for like a Lamborghini. Like, our want, our desire is sometimes without limit. How do we acknowledge that early on, that we have to harness that against it, but acknowledge that wanting and desiring is who we are. And how do we live in that balance? So we're going to go to the source sheet back. And I'm keeping them awake in the office there. So thank you. There you go. So now we're going to go down, scroll down a little bit to Shnei Luchot Habrit, right? Which actually, you can see the dates there, 1555, 1630. Rabbi Isaiah Halevi Horvitz, who's writing actually from Ottoman Israel or Palestine. What does he write? We must not ask how the Torah can expect us to exercise control over our mind's desire. This is a spurious argument. Only wicked people or fools would argue in such a way. Man is a free agent and can control his desires. He can discipline himself not to desire what is forbidden. God is well aware of our innermost thoughts and will punish people for sinful thoughts, whereas God will reward people who have pure thoughts for up to 2,000 generations. It is best if a person can train himself to have only pure thoughts, for they lead to laudable deeds. All right, we're going to go off of the sharing. And my question is that even achievable? Right? Can you really stop yourself from desiring things? I guess maybe you're from the Ottoman Empire at the time that he's living. Maybe, I don't know. But can we? And I share this rabbinic text because there is this idea, and by the way, very often in Christian texts and Christian ideas, that like we have evil thoughts, right? And that we can't have those evil thoughts because we can't act upon them. And so remember Jimmy Carter, who said, I've sinned in my heart. Those of you who are old enough to remember that quote. And the idea is, in the Jewish tradition, the rabbis want to stay from that sinning in the heart. They really do. And there's going to be a problem because we talk about the 10 Commandments being punishable by death. Can you be punished for death for wanting something? For coveting something? I mean, if that's human nature, and here is Shnei Luchot Habrit talking about, oh yeah, you need to work to eliminate those thoughts in your mind. I would suggest that is just really an impossible task. And our rabbis don't want to go in that direction. They don't want to talk us about limiting, right, all wanting. And the rabbis that I love are the ones who try and limit the areas that you want. Like, that seems more reasonable. How do we, again, think about what is attainable in life? That's really it. Do you feel like a failure because you haven't been able to achieve certain things? People have other things, and you look at them and say, I want that. Like, no. The idea here is when you start to covet the things that belong to other people, not things that you are able to attain. In that sense, you're going to end up in a downward spiral, and you will end up violating those other commandments because you're going to have no sense of boundaries. That's what happens. We all know that. Nobody's perfect. We've been in those situations in which we try to validate our actions, and it often comes from things that we want. Right? I just like, oh, I deserve this, so I'm going to take it. Right? The book I want to write, by the way, really is called When Good People Do Bad Things. Right? Because it happens all the time. I mean, that's really, I think, it's not about bad people doing bad things, because they're out there. But we, I believe, socially have a problem when it's good people who do the bad things, but they validate it as being good, right? And this is the beginning of the coveting piece of how do we desire and how do we want. Now, how do we deal with that philosophically? How do we get away and see the world differently, that we don't need to want so much of the world around us? Well, so now we have to understand our place in life and how do we live in the larger context. And here's what I love about the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments are seen as the foundation of Western civilization. That's why they're big today. In the Christian community, if you don't know, the reason why they're still around is because they believe that those are the only words spoken directly by God to the people, and therefore they're still binding, but the rest of the Torah is not. They're still around. The question is, do they still have relevance in our lives? Because many people will look at them and to say, oh, they worked a couple thousand years ago. All right, they give birth to Western civilization and our great legal structure. But are they really? Okay, Shabbat, okay, I'll give you Shabbat. Honoring parents, yeah, I'm there. Murder, but do they really speak to our lives in the way that they were profound and revolutionary in their time? They were revolutionary in terms of changing ideas. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go now back to the source sheet, and we're going to go to the second commandment. I'm going to go up a little bit, and we're going to look together at a couple of the commentaries. Right? Those of you who are working behind the scenes, God bless you. You're doing a great job. All right. You shall have, second commandment, you shall have no other gods beside me. You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image or any likeness of what is in the heavens above or on the earth below or in the waters under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am an impassioned God, sometimes translated jealous God, visiting the guilt of the parents upon the children, upon the third and upon the fourth generation. There's a whole nother story about visiting that guilt of those who reject me, but showing kindness to the thousandth generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. All right, so here is a commentary from Rashi, other gods, Elohim Achirim, which are not gods. By the way, you can't say, it's fascinating, right? You can't even say it would be incorrect, and the rabbis are problematic, saying should not have any other gods. Because the truth of the matter is, there aren't any other gods. There's only one God, and to even acknowledge them as gods is problematic, right? But other gods have made them gods over themselves, right? Others have made them the gods over themselves. It would not be correct, here it goes, to explain this to mean gods other than me, for it would be blasphemy of the Most High God to term them gods together with him, right? They can't, there's only one God. There can't be other gods. So what does it mean? Another explanation of Elohim Acharim. They are so called because they are other, i.e. strange to those who worship them. These cry to them, but they do not answer them. And it's just as though the God is another stranger to him, to the worshiper, one who has never known him at all, right? We cry out, some people, to those gods, by the way, to the false gods. And what do they give us back? Nothing. In fact, they give us the problem of emptiness, an vacuous life of not having values. Let's go to the next one, the commentary, a picture of anything in the heavens. Rashi explains this so we will not think that Tmunah is the name of a certain idol, right? Tmunah being picture or image, whose image cannot be made. Furthermore, Rashi says this, because a picture of heaven cannot be made. A picture is a property of an entity. One cannot make a picture that stands independent of a material entity. Therefore, Rashi explains of anything in the heavens, such as even stars in the shape of Aries or Taurus. All right, so we're going to go off the sharing now. So by the way, the idea of not trying to find other gods is not as complicated as trying not to covet. Remember, there's a transformative idea, right? You can't see God. You can't represent God. By the way, don't take God's name in vain. By the way, we don't even know how to pronounce God's name. We're going to make it ineffable. You can't even pronounce it. Right? So what do you hold on to? Right? How do you hold on to this revolutionary idea about God? And so it's problematic because all they can tell you is sometimes, I can tell you what God is not, but I can't necessarily tell you what God is. That's a challenge, I think. Because think about it. All the images are really anthropomorphic of God in the Torah. They actually They see things on the mountain. They hear the voice of God, right? Those are things that are tangible. It's human nature to want something tangible. That's why Judaism was so complicated, this idea of one God that you couldn't see, that you couldn't hold on to, because people wanted to control God. See, that's what it was about. That's what idols were about. We can control the gods. We can, in fact, make the gods do our will. Now, how ridiculous is that? The idea that you can make a god, right, do something for you is a form of idolatry. And by the way, don't we do that sometimes? We turn to God for ourselves to help us in ways that we need help. Now, it's one thing to want help, but it's one thing to ask for God, of God, of things that are really beyond what the human condition should ask for and to want to be connected to. And so the second commandment is just so powerful, I believe, in terms of helping us deal with that coveting piece as well. Right? The idea that when we covet, right, how do we stop desire? Same thing like with trying to understand God and trying to make false gods. That's human nature as well. Now, the first commandment that we didn't look at, right, says, I'm the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. And by the way, most people forget the last part, right? Beit avadim, from the house of bondage. Why is that there? You don't need that. You don't need that addition about coming out from the house of bondage. It's really clear. I took you out of the land of Egypt. By the way, there are suggestions that God took us from one slavery, if you will, right, as servants to Pharaoh, to be servants to God. There is this idea, avodah as worship, is also about work, and is also related to the slavery that we have. And part of it is degrees, isn't it? How you see that relationship. Is it one that you demand? Is it one that you look at? And so our relationship to God is trying to be defined here. And so what does it mean to become out of the house of bondage? It's a sense of humility. Remember where you came from. Right? You weren't born out of the celestial heavens of, right, of the gods themselves. You weren't born in that context. You were taken out of slavery. Just remember that source of the origins that you have. And when you remember that, that's going to give you the humility of who you are and what life is about. And then it's going to take us back to coveting. So let's go back to my final source. Right? And this is going to be from one of our favorite, right? Abraham Joshua Heschel, who has so much to teach us. Nothing is as hard to suppress as the will to be a slave to one's own pettiness. Gallantly, ceaselessly, quietly, man must fight for inner liberty. Inner liberty depends upon being exempt from dominion of things, as well as from domination of people. There are many who have acquired a high degree of political and social liberty, but only very few are not enslaved to things. This is our constant problem: how to live with people and remain free, how to live with things and remain independent. In a moment of eternity, while the taste of redemption was still fresh to the former slaves, the people of Israel were given the 10 words, the 10 commandments. In its beginning and end, the Decalogue deals with the liberty of man. The first word, I'm the Lord thy God who brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, reminds him that his outer liberty was given to him by God. And the 10th word, thou shalt not covet, reminds him that he himself must achieve his inner liberty. All right, you can go off the shared source. That's a beautiful, right? Because the 10 commandments, they are there not as an ancient text. That's what you have to remember. And our struggle, the reason we read these all the time, by the way, there's a whole nother story about why they're not contained in our daily liturgy. They used to be part of our daily prayers. And probably because of the early Judeo-Christians and the emphasis on that being the only word of God, right, that they changed it. But today in synagogue, already on the East Coast, Rabbi, right? They're standing, right, to receive and to re-receive the Torah. That's what Shavuot is about. Not just these ancient words, oh yeah, God gave the Torah, it's important. But what does it mean in our lives? What does it mean in this moment, right? It's about receiving. It's about an active verb. That's what's important. Zman Matan Toratenu is the giving of the Torah, and each generation has to receive it anew. And what I'm suggesting is that it's really speaking to so much of our ailments that we have. And that's about this issue of attaining things. Now, hopefully, this period of COVID-19 has had us change our thoughts about it, about being able to rethink about our priorities. I know many people who have rethought their priorities and who are living different lives today, more connected to family. And people can taste it. Here's the question I want you to explore. Will you be changed at the end of the pandemic? Right? From the positive ways in which you see things differently, will that be gone? Will you go back to the ways that you had in terms of just living too quickly, about forgetting about the most important things about life? Well, those 10 commandments are supposed to be a reminder constantly about the priorities, about be careful about the things that you really want in life. Think about what are the most important elements of what it means to live a whole life and not to be enslaved. We enslave ourselves. I'm just so busy. Well, who made you busy? Hello? I get this all the time from my family. Right? Rabbi, what I don't know about, I get this all like, you make your schedule, right? It's not like God gave it to you. And you go, oh, I guess so. And so the ways in which we just want to do more and more and more, we have to evaluate and prioritize those. Which are the things that really we want to attain? Not for the sake of ego, but for the sake really of a life well lived. From the beginning, we're reminded we were just slaves. Let us not go back to enslavement. Let us not go back to a time in which we are not masters of our destiny. That's what Heschel is telling us. We are masters of our destiny, but we forget it. And we let the elements of time and everything around us to take over our lives. It's been a pleasure and honor sharing with you on this Shavuot, Rabbis Garber and Woodard. Really, just you're at the end there. You're doing so great, and to all of you watching, just want to wish you a Chag Sameach. That's our goal, was to create and bring something to you that will sustain you and reach you and to enrich your lives during this wonderful holiday of Shavuot. So from the Rabbinical Assembly, from all of us, we just want to wish you a Chag Sameach. I know we have another great session coming up, right? Are you doing this one, Rabbi Garber? Is that what I read?
I am. I'm so excited. With someone I'll introduce in just a moment. But yes, I am. Yasher Koach to you, Stewart.
It was also beautiful. And to everyone, again, give my best, Rabbi Garber, to everybody behind the scenes, because this has just been so exceptional. And just Chag Sameach to everybody.
Chag Sameach. Chag Sameach. And thank you, Eric. I can introduce myself if you'd like. But so everyone,